Don't let their young looks fool you. They are wise and well-versed in the world of politics in and around the St. Louis region. Welcome to the table, Nick Pister, reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and Jason Rosenbaum, reporter for St. Louis Public Radio. Okay, guys, we're going to hear from the newly elected Ferguson City Council members a little later in the show, but maybe you could start us with a little context before we hear from them about their campaigns and their victories. Let's just start as simple as possible. Did anyone backed by the protest movement win a seat in Ferguson?
No. I mean, it was pretty much, everyone thought that would be, everyone was looking to see what would happen with that and thinking that there would be this wave of support from the protesters that would put in one of the people from their movement. And what we ended up seeing was we did see the racial makeup of the Ferguson Council change, but you don't see that real dyed-in-the-wool protest movement now represented within the Ferguson City Council, which is what a lot of people had hoped for. And I think one thing it at least stood out to me, and it is that what a lot of people didn't realize during the days of the unrest around Ferguson is many of the protesters are not from Ferguson. They don't live there. Therefore, they can't actually vote and take part in these elections. It was a microcosm of a lot of people from the areas surrounding it. Not to say that none of the protesters actually live in Ferguson, but it is a movement much larger than that. But you have a town of 20,000 people, and for them to have a real impact in the election would have taken a lot more. And it seems like a lot of the old guard still, or people who are kind of more mainstream, accepting of things, with some of the previous administration, were able to carry the day and win.
Well, Ella Jones had some support among the activist movement, but I wouldn't say she had the organized groups behind her. But, you know, the Wesley Bell and Bob Hudgens were clearly opposed by quote-unquote protest-aligned groups, especially outside groups from
Brian Fletcher, I think you meant. You said Bob Hudgens.
Yeah. Oh, I meant Brian Fletcher. Bob Hudgens actually
and
lost.
Maybe we should, and before we go forward, we should break it down. Wesley Bell,
yes.
And much was made of race, as you said. So Wesley Bell, African-American, Brian Fletcher, former mayor, Caucasian, and then Ms. Jones, African-American.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, given the amount of attention that was placed on Ferguson for being a two-thirds African-American city, yet not having a lot of African-American representation in government, I do think that's significant in more than just a symbolic sense, because racial diversity in politics has been a long-standing issue in the state of Missouri, and it was kind of magnified by Ferguson. But Nick's right. I mean, as far as, you know, getting somebody who's a quote-unquote protest-aligned candidate on the city council, I mean, I don't think that they were terribly successful. And even Ella Jones, who some in the movement supported out of a four-candidate race, I mean, the reason why she won more likely is, number one, she started campaigning earlier. Number two, she was actually supported by many of the old guard within the local Democratic Party. And number three, she's a Mary Kay representative, which gives her the personal skills that I think are needed in local politics like that. I hope I got the company name, Mary Kay.
I think so.
She's used to going door to door.
I've already gotten one name wrong, so I wanted to make sure.
That's okay. Let's go back to Wesley Bell for just a little bit. They put he's currently a municipal judge in another municipality. When that's a hot topic to say the least. Now they have that on the Ferguson City Council. How does he square that?
Well, he's indicating that there were problems that need to be fixed, and that he was advocating, you know, for changes, and you know, that he wasn't a contributing factor to the problems with the municipal judges. But at the same time, you know, I was at his election night party. The mayor of Ferguson, you know, who's been in the news all these months since the unrest, you know, he showed up there. So I mean, clearly, you know, Wesley Bell, but he also had Antonio French, who was at his election night victory, but it was after he had won. So everybody's sort of going to the victor, but it was not. He's not the type of person that a lot of the protesters wanted. And you know, while the racial makeup has changed, it may not produce the results in the long run of what they need.
Yeah, and I think Wesley Bell's response, and I know that he's going to be on the show later, is he told me this almost verbatim. Just because, you know, there are some bad municipal judges doesn't mean all municipal judges are bad. And it'll remain to be seen whether he ends up keeping the position in Valda City as a municipal judge and prosecutor in Riverview. But I do want to touch on something Nick said that hasn't been talked about a lot. I do think that this election signified an indirect victory for Mayor James Knowles III, who's been heavily criticized throughout this situation. And while I don't know if the three councilmen are going to be quote unquote allies of his, I don't think they're going to be like antagonists either. And I think it really has to draw into question about whether there's enough support to recall him from office or even gather enough signatures, which is going to be a tough process. I mean, he's already kind of broken the mold by being a Republican elected in the heavily Democratic North County. And I mean, he's a nonpartisan office, but if he's already broken that barrier, this may be another challenge he has to go forward, but clearly the election doesn't really bode well for the recall efforts.
No, I think the recall is, this clearly shows it's going to be very tough for them to get anything to happen there. And it shows that he is able to put together some type of coalition that may keep him in power. They're going to have big decisions. They're going to be talking about what happens with their police department, about a lot of things going on forward.
About how they're going to pay for stuff. They're
About who they're
millions of dollars in the hole, are they not?
Right, or who they're going to hire to be the new city manager. A lot of this comes down to who's the city manager, not who's the mayor, or not who's on the city council. Yeah. They're going to make that decision. And so these are the people who are going to be there. And it seems like he has at least some tacit coalition behind him that will support his initiatives. Because these were not the bomb throwers, the people who are really going to come in and break everything apart and change everything. This is almost like, these people are going to be a lot more thoughtful as listening to what he has to say. And
one of the things that I think was lost in the election is no matter which candidate you were following, whether it was someone like Brian Fletcher on one end of the spectrum or someone like Bob Hudgens on the protester spectrum, none of the candidates supported disbanding the Ferguson Police Department and contracting with St. Louis County for different reasons. But that had been such a national, I don't want to say obsession, but fixation after the grand jury decision, almost like it was going to be a fait accompli. And it's very unlikely the Justice Department can just dissolve the department by fiat. They can obviously sue Ferguson and make it way too expensive, and maybe they change their mind later, but it doesn't really look like, if the decision has to be done by the governmental entity, that there's really any support on that council to do something like that. So I think that was missed.
What about the DOJ recommendations that are on paper? How do they enforce those, and can the city afford to do what they've asked?
They'll probably enforce them through a consent decree, which I don't want to say is inevitable, but I think is highly possible.
They said, they've already done some of them. Body cameras on police, things like that. So some of those things they were working out long before this ever happened. But it's going to be there are a lot of decisions, and as we've seen even in recent months, the tenor and pitch is still there in Ferguson. Things can still happen. Protests still show up there every once in a while. We just saw, not that long ago, where a couple of police officers were shot there during some of the protests. So it can boil up, and there are these flashpoints if something happens, or that's the epicenter of where people go. And so we could still see that stuff boil over in the months or even years to come. And that's why what happens with the city council is important.